The Right Side with Doug Billings.
Hello, America. Hello, world. Welcome to The Right Side. I'm Doug Billings. Ladies and gentlemen, a fight that goes to the core of what kind of country we intend to be just moved closer to the Supreme Court. The ACLU has asked the Supreme Court to strike down a Texas law that requires the Ten Commandments to be displayed in public school classrooms. Now, this isn't a small technical dispute about wall space, okay? It's a contest over whether a nation can still acknowledge the moral foundation that shaped it, or whether those foundations have to be treated as a contraband in the very institutions that form the next generation. These educational facilities, indoctrination camps, public schools, known by all of those names. What does this mean for us, for the country, for the next generation? Ladies and gentlemen, the right side is now upon you. I'm going to talk about all of this. Are you ready? Let's go.
The Right Side with Doug Billings.
We are not liberal snowflakes who melt away in the face of tragedy, adversity, and challenge. We are a covenant nation under God, and his divine providence is not dead and it's not gone. It is living within each and every one of you. And you will bring it to life in such a way that the world has never seen before. We never back down. We never give up. We march forward.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, Texas decided that students should see the Ten Commandments in their classroom. The law doesn't require anybody to pray. It doesn't force anybody to convert. It just places one of the most influential moral documents in human history on the wall where children spend their days. The ACLU's response was immediate and it was predictable. This is an establishment of religion, a violation of the Constitution, and it's got to be stopped. Never mind that the entire separation of church and state is a misquoted and out of context piece of verbiage from Thomas Jefferson to the Danbury Baptist Association that liberals continually take out of context. Thomas Jefferson nor any of the other founding fathers meant that religion should be removed from public life or government. So that's point A. But we've heard this argument for 60 years. And for 60 years, the same pattern has repeated. Religious expression is pushed further and further to the margins of public life under the banner of neutrality. The result is not neutrality. The result is a public square that pretends the deepest questions about right and wrong, duty and the human person can be ignored without consequence. So, my friends, let's be honest, please, about history. The Ten Commandments weren't invented by the Texas legislature last year. They've been part of the moral architecture of this civilization for centuries. They appear in courthouses, in the jurisprudence of the founding era, and in the assumptions that underpinned American law long before the modern Supreme Court started scrubbing them from view. The idea that a school hallway suddenly becomes a theocracy because the commandments are visible is a recent legal fiction. It's not a founding principle. You know, many of you that watch the show religiously, no pun intended, you know that I'm Catholic. I don't believe that the state should baptize anybody or run the church. I also don't believe that the state can raise children in a moral vacuum and call it freedom. The Ten Commandments aren't sectarian property. They express basic truths about human nature that Jews and Christians and a lot of others have recognized for millennia. Don't murder, don't steal, don't lie, honor your parents, keep the day of rest, and acknowledge that there's a moral order higher than the preferences of the moment. A culture that treats those truths as optional eventually discovers they weren't optional after all. Ladies and gentlemen, look at what the alternative has produced. We've spent decades telling students that the only safe public morality is one that refuses to name any transcendent source. And the results are visible: rising anxiety, collapsing meaning, families under strain, and a generation that's been given rights without duties and freedom without purpose. You can't strip the moral furniture out of a civilization and then act surprised when the house starts to feel empty. The ACLU and its allies are going to insist that this is about protecting religious minorities and preventing coercion. Well, that's the polished version. The deeper project on their side is the removal of any public acknowledgement that morality has a source outside of the self or of the state. Once that acknowledgement is gone, the state becomes the only remaining authority that can define right and wrong. And that should concern everybody, religious or not. You know, there's a practical question here that rarely gets asked. What exactly is the harm in a child seeing "thou shalt not steal" or "honor thy father and thy mother" on a classroom wall? I mean, is the claim that these words are so powerful that they'll override every other influence in a student's life? Or is the real objection that they remind people of obligations that modern culture finds inconvenient? The first claim is exaggerated. The second is revealing. A nation has to decide whether it still believes there are truths that bind us, whether we like them or not. If the answer is no, then public life becomes a contest of wills, and the strongest faction wins. But if the answer is yes, then it's not only permissible, but it's healthy to let the next generation see the classic statements of those truths. The Texas law is, in my view, it's a modest attempt to do exactly that. We've got to understand the stakes. This case isn't really about one state statute. It's about whether the public schools are going to remain aggressively secular in the name of neutrality, or whether they can tolerate the open presence of the moral tradition that made ordered liberty possible in the first place. The court's eventually going to have to choose, and so will the rest of us. Now, there's hope in this fight. The fact that Texas passed the law and other states are watching shows that the long retreat isn't, inevitable. Parents and legislatures are being, I think they're, in a lot of ways, they're beginning to push back against the idea that the only safe public culture is a stripped down one. And they're remembering that children need formation, not just information, and that formation requires a moral vocabulary that's larger than, be nice and follow the rules. The Ten Commandments have outlasted empires and ideologies, legal fashions, and so forth. And they're going to outlast this controversy also. The only question is whether this country still has the confidence to let them be seen by the people who will inherit it. That's the real issue, before the court and before us. Not whether a fraud document on a wall violates the Constitution, but whether a free people still believe that they can afford to remember the moral law that made freedom sustainable. That's the question. Do you believe that? We've known for a long time that the radical liberal movement in this country, the Communist Socialist, formerly known as Democrat Party, has excommunicated God from its ranks. They have literally taken God off of their platform. And there's no way that anyone with any shred of intellect can say that a Christian person can pursue the platform that the modern day Communist Socialist, formerly known as Democrat Party, pursues. And I'm not claiming at all that the Republican Party is perfect, but at least the Republican Party aspires to divine providence, to the intent of God and the inspiration of this country, and the intent of the founding fathers. The radical liberal Communist Socialist, formerly known as Democrat Party, cannot claim any of that. It's an interesting situation, ladies and gentlemen. Remember, John Adams. It was the one who said that this nation, this republic, is wholly and entirely intended for a moral people. Now, in closing, this does not mean that America is on her deathbed. She's not. America has not been on her deathbed. You know, I don't care. Over the last 10 or 12 years, everything that we've seen, she's not on her deathbed. Now, there have been periods of time when America has been in nightmares, most certainly. But the good news about that is that everybody wakes up from nightmares. We've been through much worse in our history. The revolution itself was much worse than this, the Civil War. So although it seems bad at times in this country, know that America is strong and that divine providence is still out there guiding this republic. And your prayers prevent the republic from spinning off into complete chaos. All right, ladies and gentlemen, until next time, God bless you. God bless your families and all who you care about. Please remember, share this episode, subscribe to the show, YouTube, Rumble, follow me on X, and prayerfully consider donating to the show at dougbillings.us. We're in this thing together, ladies and gentlemen. Believe it, for the Republic. Cheers.
The Right Side with Doug Billings.